in this video clip, I want to give a few tips on how to succeed in this course, our Understanding Einstein course, or really any course that you might be taking. And our first tip here is cultivate a growth mindset. Cultivate a growth mindset. What do we mean by this? Well, let me start off by doing a little thought experiment. Einstein was famous for thought experiments. This one actually isn't similar to one of Einstein's experiments, but it actually has been done. There is a professor here at Stanford whose name is Carol Dweck. Very well-known professor of psychology and has done a lot of research in this area. And in fact, let me just add here that if you're, as I talk more about this, if you're interested in finding out more about it, she has a book for the general reader just called Mindset that talks about some of these ideas in more detail. We're just going to hit a high point here. So here's this imaginary situation that actually she set up with college students in this case. And she's told them, okay, imagine you're going to a class. It's your favorite class. You love the subject. You love the professor. And in class today, at the end of class, you get the latest paper back or exam back. And you see a grade that you definitely didn't expect. Maybe you were thinking A or B range, and you're in the C minus, maybe even a D or something like that. And she asked them, imagine how you would feel in that situation. Be honest with yourself. What would your response be? And then she said, okay, you go out of class, and you're on your way home, and maybe you don't quite come to a stop at a stop sign or something like that. You're going slightly too fast, and you get pulled over, and you get a ticket. Right? So now how do you feel about how the day is going? And then thirdly, you get home, you call up your best friend, and you want to commiserate a little bit, and your friend just says, oh, that's nice, and then sort of blows you off. And how would you feel at that point? And as she analyzed these responses of these students, she discovered that they seemed to fit into sort of two categories. One category were feelings such as, in terms of the paper exam, I just can't do this subject. I don't have what it takes. How would they respond to it? They would go into their closet and pout. They would break something. They would eat chocolate or whatever. And yet there's another set of responses that, again, supposedly honest responses here. Students would say, well, I'd study smarter next time for the exam. I'd be more careful driving. I would call back my friend and patch things up and talk it out, and so on and so forth. And this was intriguing to her and others who were doing this research, and they did a number of other studies as well with this, and they seemed to find what they called, more or less people in two camps. Not hard and fast, but people who tended more toward either a fixed mindset, they called it, a fixed mindset, or a growth mindset. And those who tended toward a fixed mindset in terms of intellectual matters said, I have a certain amount of intellectual ability and I can't grow up more than that. My brain is just sort of set. Well, those who had a growth mindset said, essentially, you know what, I struggle at this, but I can get better at it. And so they had that growth mentality, that growth mindset. And actually in brain research, that goes by a fancy name, more and more scientists are realizing that the brain can be characterized by neuroplasticity. It actually means that we can grow neurons in the brain. Our brains can get better. Now, certainly there are certain times of life where that occurs much more readily than other times, and yet just by taking a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, reminding ourselves that yes, we can get better at something, they found that has an enormous effect on performance. They've actually studied students going into like a freshman chemistry class, a very difficult class, and by asking them a few questions beforehand, they can more or less identify those who tend toward a more fixed mindset versus those who tend toward a growth mindset. Whether it's genetics, partly, personality, just upbringing, all those things can factor into it, but growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And then they track them in the class. And they found that both groups struggled. Many of them in both groups struggled. But the ones with a growth mindset had that resilience, that perseverance, that grit, sometimes it's called, to say, I'm not doing well in this course, but it's not that I've reached my level of understanding, that I can't understand anymore, I can't reach the next level, but they persevered. And in the end of the course, they tended to get about 1 grade higher, those who had the growth mindset going in, than those who had the fixed mindset. And so, but you might be saying, well, what if a fixed mindset is fixed, right? Then you can't change it, right? You just either have the growth mindset or the fixed mindset. What Dweck and others have discovered, however, is that it actually can be changed. Just by the very fact of understanding that growth can occur and that you can improve your understanding. It may be a struggle, but you can get to a better level of understanding, that you can actually put somebody into a growth mindset. Dweck herself talks about in her book how she has a tendency toward a fixed mindset, and it's been many years of reminding herself that of the results of her research, that it's important to take a growth mindset to a subject if you want to break through some of that struggle of understanding and get to the next level. So cultivate a growth mindset. Remind yourself that your brain is not fixed, that it actually can learn new things, can improve your understanding, no matter how old you are or where you are in your current level of understanding. You can always reach a higher level of understanding. It doesn't mean everybody will reach the same level of understanding, of course, and everybody starts at the same level, but you as an individual can improve that level of understanding. And certainly when we are taking a course in understanding Einstein, right, the special theory of relativity, we need to remind ourselves that, yes, some of the concepts may be difficult, but with some work, with some thought, with some practice, we can actually get to a higher level of understanding, a deeper level of understanding. Okay, so cultivate a growth mindset. And by the way, just as an aside here, for those of you who have kids, or maybe in the future might have kids, this is very important, because often we will say if a child comes home with a good grade, you'll say, you must be really smart at that. It's natural, right? Natural praise that we give children. And yet, what Dweck and others have found, that type of praise actually is counterproductive, because it inculcates the fixed mindset in the student, that they're smart and they have a certain level of intelligence, but they think that is it, that's the level. If instead you praise their effort, you must have worked really hard at this. That sort of inculcates a growth mindset in students and children. So basically, praise effort, not intelligence. That's just a little aside with this. Again, Carol Dweck's book, very interesting book on mindset if you want to read more about these things. But for our purposes, just remind yourself, and for some of us, we have to remind ourselves a lot, cultivate a growth mindset. Okay, we won't spend as long a time on these others as that one, but that's very, very important. Number 2, which relates a little bit to number 1 here, and that is knowledge is constructed, knowledge is constructed, not received. Sometimes we have this idea that, especially listening to video clips or a lecture or whatever, that just we're pouring the information into our brain and we hope some of it sticks in there someplace. But actually, the process of understanding something, of getting a better understanding of something, is a construction process. A good analogy is like building a tall building, building a skyscraper, any building. You've got to lay a good foundation and then build on that foundation. And so sometimes we're trying to build on floor 12 when we haven't really built floors 6 through 8 very well. And floors 9, 10, 11 don't even exist, and we're trying to do something on floor 12. So knowledge is constructed, not received. It's a process of construction, and you want to lay those foundations for that process so you can build on it. Again, sort of the growth mindset there, that growth is occurring, but it's a process of construction, not just sort of pouring information into our brains. So again, remind ourselves about that. It's a construction process throughout any course that you may be taking. Okay, knowledge is constructed, not received. And number 3, embrace the struggle. because this construction process is often a struggle. And we talked about that a little bit with the growth mindset as well. And Einstein has a wonderful quote on this. He says that it is not the result of scientific research that ennobles humans and enriches their nature. Okay, so he's talking about ennobling humans, enriching our nature. But what actually does it? It's the struggle to understand while performing creative and open-minded intellectual work. So he emphasizes it's the struggle to understand. And certainly Einstein, he didn't know the term growth mindset, but he definitely had a growth mindset. He struggled for years on some of these things we'll be talking about, the special theory of relativity, to understand what was going on. In fact, even talked later on about how he'd reached a point of psychic tension. He just could not figure it out, and yet he persevered and really sort of embraced that struggle to understand. We had the advantage of following in his footsteps. He was blazing new trails. We were following in those footsteps. But even so, concepts aren't always easy. The math for some of us might be a little tricky at times because it's been a while since we've had it. But as I've mentioned before, we'll have a math review video clip you can watch. And, of course, you also have the option of focusing on the qualitative aspects of the course, taking a qualitative approach. But embrace the struggle because that's an ennobling, enriching experience. And when you are able to get to the other side, as it were, that's when a real feeling of accomplishment occurs. So embrace the struggle. Actually, number 4 here, we're going to need a little more room for this, so let me erase our first 3. Those are more general concepts. Let's just do some practical tips. First practical tip is, probably should have mentioned this at the very beginning here, but we'll mention it now, take notes. As you watch these video clips, it's very easy, just because we're in the habit of watching YouTube videos or TV or whatever, that we're not used to taking notes. Take notes, though. There's something about the writing process that enables stuff to get into our brain and stick a little bit more than if we're just watching something. So take notes. And in many cases, we'll have handouts to go along with the video clips to even encourage you to take notes. A handout like with an outline and spaces to take notes, or use your own notebook, of course. So take notes is first. Visualize. As we mentioned, Einstein was famous for his thought experiments. We'll be doing some of those as well. But just sort of get pictures in your mind. Try to even sketch it out. So combine taking notes and visualizing something if it helps to sort of get a picture of what's going on. So visualize. Thirdly, here is repeat. What do we mean by that? Well, the great thing about things like video clips is that you can watch them again. And studies have shown that our understanding of something, if you watch a video clip or attend a lecture, our level of understanding, what we actually remember, goes down fairly quickly. But if you, within 24 hours of first viewing something or listening to a lecture, if you review that material, if you repeat that material, in a sense, our memory goes up by about 40%. And so essentially what you want to do, and people have done studies of what's the best schedule for this repetition. So maybe within the first 24 hours, so it kicks it up again, and then it will gradually go down again. Maybe 2 days later, it kicks it up again, then maybe a week later, and so on and so forth. We don't have to be that precise for our purposes, but just the whole notion of repetition to get things to stick in our brain. Important to repeat the material. Now, another thing along with that is, how do you repeat the material? And this point is testing is better than rehearsing. So we're talking about studying now in terms of studying material. Testing is better than rehearsing. Too often I see students who, when they're studying for an exam or studying material that they've previously worked on, they're just sort of reading through, they've got all their yellow highlighting in the textbook, and they're just sort of reading through it again. They say, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. I get that. Studies, again, have shown that if you're just sort of rehearsing the material in your mind, again, it doesn't work as well. It's more effective to actually test yourself. Make up questions about the material. If there's a textbook involved, there are questions in the textbook you can work on. And in our course, we'll have many assessment quizzes to just help in that testing process. For whatever reason, it engages the brain more if we actually have to solve a problem or answer a question rather than just sort of review the material in terms of rehearsing material. Now, obviously, there are many cases where rehearsing is important, musical instruments and so on and so forth. But in this case of studying we're talking about here, testing is better than rehearsing. And then E here, this one will not be popular. It is don't multitask. Because we all like to multitask. Again, studies have shown when they've looked at people who try to multitask, it just doesn't work very well. In fact, let me give you, I mentioned the Carol Dweck book a little bit ago. Another good book, if you're interested in the sort of the brain science behind some of this practical advice, it's a book called Brain Rules by John Medina. So Brain Rules. There's a website, I believe it's www.brainrules.net. Very fascinating book. Talks about brain science, but then the practical implications. And it turns out the brain has what is sometimes called an attentional focus. It focuses attention. It can only focus attention on one thing at a time. Now we can switch back and forth between things, but there's a slight delay. And then you lose focus on one thing when you switch to another thing. So it's like, you're doing something and email comes in, and so then you switch focus to the email or your Facebook page or whatever, or that text message that just comes through. And another interesting thing they found is the people who think they are best at multitasking are actually the worst. Okay, so if you think you're really good at multitasking, you may have to question yourself a little bit there. So especially in studying something, sometimes because of just the lives we lead, it's hard for us to focus attention. So let me just give you one brief technique to help. It's called the Pomodoro. The Pomodoro technique. Some of you may know Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. So what's the idea here with this tomato technique? Well, it comes from those kitchen timers that are shaped like a tomato with a little twisty top, and you can twist it and then set the timer, and then it goes bing after however many minutes you set it for. So that's where the name comes from. The idea is this: whether you have a tomato timer or whatever kind of timer you have, set it for 20 minutes. Then focus your attention on whatever you're doing, say studying material, working on something, for 20 minutes. And then timer goes off, bing, you get a 5-minute break. Check your email, Facebook page, messages, whatever at that point. And then you're back again after 5 minutes, 20 more minutes, 5-minute break, 20 more minutes. If you have a challenge with multitasking or always being, your focus of attention is always shifting. And so that you will get better results that way with the so-called Pomodoro technique. Just like the Brain Rules, www.brainrules.net, if you do a search for Pomodoro technique on the internet, you can find a number of websites that tell more about that. But that's the basic idea. Okay, one more thing. So that practical tips. Finally, this is number 5. We'll introduce a little Latin phrase here. Festina lente. Festina lente. Some of you may have heard this, may know about it. What's in English? It is make haste slowly. Somewhat of a contradiction in terms, but the idea here is essentially don't go too fast. Don't get ahead of yourself. And especially in a course like this where we want to get a deeper understanding of some of Einstein's ideas, we're going to try to practice this. Make haste slowly. Now, for some of you, that means that will be going maybe a little too slowly. You'll want to jump ahead. Well, the great thing, of course, is with video clips, to a certain extent, you can jump ahead a little bit in the course, or you can fast forward through the video clip if you think we're going a little bit too slowly. So try to remind ourselves throughout the course, make haste slowly, because haste is, in a sense, the enemy of understanding, and especially deeper understanding. And of course, that's our goal in this course, to understand Einstein at a deeper level. So some practical tips for how to succeed in this course, or really any course.